Jackal, the decentralized storage solution that's trying to be the world's hard drive. Cosmos has some of the best infrastructure for DePin, and decentralized storage is one of the biggest use cases for it. Jackal is combining the two to best execute on that vision, and we're going to talk with Patrick Dunlop on this episode of Macrocosm. What is Jackal, and why should anyone care about it?
Ooh, good question right off the bat. So what is Jackal? So Jackal is a decentralized storage layer where we essentially have a Cosmos layer 1 blockchain that has its own peer-to-peer network in the validator set. And then we have another peer-to-peer network of storage providers all around the world. What these guys do is they provide storage to the network, and the validators are kind of like the police to ensure that storage is always there, files are always there, who has access to what data at what time, full file permission system, storage deals, all that good stuff. So what is Jackal? It's a way for people to store data on blockchain rails. It doesn't only work for the Jackal protocol, but we have an outpost system. So we wrapped all our blockchain modules into a smart contract, and then we deployed it on Base and Archway and other blockchains. So developers can build very good things. So they can have read and write to off-chain storage. They have the ability for them to store data, have automations, less API spaghetti in the background. So it enables people to build bigger things. Is probably the best way to put it, and it's kind of like adding memory to a calculator. It's another way to put it, because you can't fit much data in the blocks of a blockchain.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess now so you have the sort of storage network, and then you have the validator set. And So you said you can deploy the smart contracts to multiple blockchains. Is that correct?
Yeah, we use the Serdar from the ICF made something called the Interchain Accounts Controller smart contract. So it's like ICA, but instead of actually doing it at the protocol module level, we do it through the smart contract to kind of have an ability that we're a little bit more flexible. So it's not just like Cosmos and chains upgraded to SDK 50, for example.
And so why would you want it on multiple chains? Is there because you can access the storage just directly from the peer-to-peer nodes on that network, right? So why would you want multiple deployments?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Okay, so let's kind of take it through the eyes of an app builder, right? Let's say that you're building you want to build a decentralized social app on Base, for example, right? And then you get to the part of the building of that product where you have to figure out where you're going to put all this data, because you can't fit all the posts and all the media files into the chain directly. You have two options and two different paths that you can take. Option number one is you kind of use AWS and then pin to IPFS that way, so that you have like a centralized place that introduces a lot of vulnerabilities from centralized control. One missed credit card bill and all the NFTs are gone, for example. So that's kind of an issue, right? The other option is to leave Base and build on top of a kind of like a monolithic storage L1, like a Filecoin or Airweave. That's awesome, but then you don't have the community and liquidity that you have anymore. And you kind of have the situation playing out right now where either you have to use centralized APIs or you have to leave and build on top of their rails directly. And then now you're on like a proof of work blockchain, and you don't really have the speeds and liquidity that you're used to. So we think that it's kind of silly that there's 26,000 developers in crypto right now. About 300 build on Airweave, about like 500 and something build on Filecoin. That means there's 25,000 developers without access to scalable storage on chain, with a simple smart contract call that can be integrated into the protocol directly and manage permissions that way. So our thesis is that if you want to build scale applications, you need compute, you need storage, and we think that it's an important piece of the puzzle for people to build bigger and better things. You shouldn't have to sacrifice something as simple as storage to deciding what tech stack you want to build on. We think that's silly. It's also better distribution, right? From the Jackal protocol's eyes, instead of convincing and fighting with developers on other general purpose L1s to come and build on our chain, we can just deploy smart contracts and they can have access to it that way, depending on how they want to integrate too, right? You could use Jackal.js over there, and then you can integrate that way. It's a little bit more complicated from that side of things, rather than just having a smart contract on that chain you could call. You can use an API, self-host the API, or just have like an API as a service that you can integrate that way. But it also comes down to what does that person want and what problems are they looking to solve. It's a different value proposition depending on where we are.
Hmm. Yeah, that's good. So I guess I have a smart contract on Base. I want to have like Base NFTs that are actually on chain, not
Sure.
like an IPFS link. Then my contract will interact with the Jackal contract, which then will do ICA across to the Cosmos SDK Jackal chain, and then it will send those images stored to the PDP network. Is that how
Exactly.
it traces out? Is that
So
right?
so the images go over HTTPS to the storage providers, and then they communicate with our chain directly to make sure that it's there and it's stored and that user is paid and all that good stuff. But we right now in Cosmos ecosystem, we use just like IBC bridges as like a GMP bridge to get the messages back to the Jackal chain to take actions on behalf of the user. Right now on Base, for example, we have to kind of build our own bridging technology for just one-off for these EVMs until we have IBC that way. Also, the other limitation of IBC right now is actually like the size of the transactions going through the relayers. We've noticed that can bog it down a little bit too. So yeah, that's the other side of things.
And then now let's talk about the SDK to the P2P network that actually stores all the files. So none of the Cosmos validators are like forced to like hold all this data, but how do you make sure that the validators keep the data? What do you call the data storage providers? What do you call them?
It's just our storage providers. It's just our second P2P network.
How do you make sure that they're responsible for keeping all this data? Do you have like a sampling technique or sort of talk about that?
Yeah, so we have a few things that we do, depending on the scalability, right? Because there's only like, if we have, let's say, 1 million files on the network, and they all have to call in with a proof, that's a lot of data that's going to be going through our validator set. It'll bloat the blocks, do all that nasty stuff, right? So right now, essentially every single file on the network, the storage provider, every X amount of time, let's say it's every 3 hours, every single storage provider on the network has to submit a proof that they have a file. In the event that they don't have the file and they miss another proof window, so they have two proof windows that they have the opportunity to prove they have the file. If that doesn't occur and they can't prove it, that storage deal will break. What happens then is the validator set say, okay, that provider doesn't have a file. We're going to issue a new storage deal. Another provider will grab that file and then copy it from the other two forms of redundancy. So it's kind of like storage whack-a-mole in a weird way. So the validators are in charge of managing not only like the storage deals, but also the file trees and making sure that everyone's paid for their accounts and all that good stuff. Um, when that doesn't scale, that also becomes a question is like, okay, like let's say that we have all these files, we have 2 million of them, that's 1 kilobyte chunks, that's a lot of data that we're putting into the blocks. The next thing that we're going to implement, and we had this implemented in the previous version, but we stripped it off because we're like now on V4, which just has better logic in general. So we don't have to layer this on yet, but we're probably going to have to eventually, is we have something called consensus spheres that we built. So the providers amongst themselves prove to each other. So you build a consensus sphere, you prove to the providers, and the providers do attestations to the chain to make that actual transaction smaller. And then we can throw on like ZK proofs to kind of do string compression as well.
And so, talk about first of all what type of proofs. Obviously, you're not sending all the data. What? How
No.
long are these checks? Every single day, every 3 hours? What was it?
Right now, I believe it's every 5 hours that all of the files are essentially having to be proved to the network, but it's not at that time then all the storage providers call in at the same time. Every
Uh
file
huh.
has a different proving window.
And so then you guys have this proofs in order to check every 5 hours, and this is like what is it? 3x redundancy? Is that right?
Yeah, 3x redundancy by default. You can also with Jackal JS, like you can choose the redundancy, so you can have 1x and be a little bit frisky, or you can go with like 10x redundancy if you'd like.
And so is you have the rent storage? Is that correct, or is it like the whole like buy it and you like is it stored forever sort of
Yeah,
deal?
that's a good question. So basically, the way that we do it right now is the protocol sets a price per month per terabyte, and then we work from there. So if you want, like we can go up to like 2 trillion years or however many bytes that we can actually allow for the purchase of storage. But essentially, the way that it operates is the user can choose the duration, minimum 1 month, and then it can go all the way up to however long that you'd like. It gives you a little bit more flexibility, right? If you want to think about unit economics, if you want to store a file for like longer than 50 years, then Arrowweave would be the cheaper option, for example. We can also get into a bunch of other features, whether speed or programmable privacy or data permissions, stuff like that. But just from the financial aspect, we like to host data for people that want hot storage, and they can actually choose the duration of that and have a little bit more flexibility and composability at that level.
Yeah, I think that's good. So now let's talk about the use cases, and then we'll go down like the technology feature list and all that. So,
Yeah.
what are the use cases?
Yeah. So we have two kinds of customers. Well, we have three kinds of customers, right? So we have the decentralized data privacy advocates that kind of use Jackal like a Dropbox or the Jackal Vault product. That's user number one. Is that scalable for the protocol over a long period of time? Users don't store that much data, and the way that the economics work is we need a lot of data onto the network for that to actually work. You only have so many memes, right, that you can store in like a decentralized Dropbox type product. The second user is Web3 developers. So, example, if you're building with Stargaze and you want to have a place for the NFTs to go, if you're building an AI agent or a chat bot and you want it to not have dementia every time you refresh the page, if you're building on a cache and you want data persistence, so the storage actually persists through leases, you're doing something like a Bitsong or decentralized music or social media, any web scale application that's not like traditional finance applications, unless we're doing like archiving or like state snapshots or stuff like that. It's once we start to get a little bit deeper into the meta of what's being built on these rails, those developers are primarily the biggest customer for us. And then there's the Web 2 company, and they're a little bit different. They don't really care about decentralization or privacy or self custody. What they see in Jackal is multi region geo distributed backups that's secure and verifiable, where only the end user can have access to it. We can access your data even if we wanted to, it's in the wallets. And they kind of don't want as much of the self custody. They want the multi region geo distributed backups that's verifiable, that's also like 10x cheaper than AWS when you include transfer fees. So that's the primary use case for them. They kind of like, we have like a few telecoms right now, like one in Iowa, for example, that's just backing up user data to Jackal. But hopefully before the end of the year, we'll have our S3 API out as well. So those users have access as well. So a lot of different people, a lot of different needs that all care about different things, which is not the best way to start a business, I'm sure. But when you're this layer of the stack, you kind of have to be a lot more flexible.
I guess, do you want to get into the sort of DePin side of things? Because, you know, like typically decentralization and like is kind of like an extra safety precaution, but it's not like helping you. It's not like decentralization makes things slower, but because you have geo distribution, this makes like actually sharing files like better. And can you talk about like a DePin as a whole, all that?
DePin's really interesting, right? It has the ability, and it's not traditionally for like when you want to think about why you would build a DePin project, period. Predominantly, it's about automating operational expenses into the blockchain directly. So a lot of like the jobs that you would have to hire for are just automated, no chargebacks, like managing accounts, doing all these things. The second thing is bootstrapping CapEx. So this is something that DePin networks do very well, where you borrow from the future to bootstrap infrastructure. For example, if I wanted to go to a VC and say, hey, I'm going to raise like $1 billion so I can build data centers and do all that stuff. Right now, with the way that we have token economics, you can bootstrap a compute network, you can bootstrap a storage network. We have people bootstrapping mapping stuff with Hive Mapper, for example, where they have more up-to-date actual footage of the world. GeoNet, for example, where you have like positioning. We can go down the list. I know that there's another team that's doing like drone footage of different areas, but it comes down to you can bootstrap CapEx extremely efficiently, and you can bootstrap a lot of CapEx extremely efficiently. The second thing is you can automate a lot of the jobs into the protocol directly, so you can be much more lean, have way better unit economics, and all that kind of stuff. When it comes to the actual features of decentralization or DePin that helps Jackal, a lot more scrappy in the sense of unit economics around how much storage costs. Right now, like we were priced at like $15 a month per terabyte with 3 times redundancy and no transfer charges at all, which is like still about 10x cheaper than an AWS or an Azure or Google Cloud. But it really comes down to the bootstrapping and the automation that you're able to do with these things. When it comes to transfer as well, right? Since we're just changing permissions on chain, you can transfer any file anywhere in the world in like less than 6 seconds when it comes to like accessing it. Download speeds, obviously, it's hard for us to say because it depends where you live and where like the current like providers that are hosting that file are. But there's other things that you can do. You can create like another layer on top that's a CDN, for example. But it's super flexible. That's the best thing about building from first principles this way is you're kind of rebuilding the way that the internet works, especially when it comes to storage for us.
Yeah, and so typically, I guess DePin was like coined by Solana, but actually Cosmos has had Akash and DVPN and
DePin.
NIM, or was it NIM for decentralized compute and VPN. Why not go on Solana or why your own chain for the specific storage use case?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that if you're building a DePin and you're not building on your own chain, you're making a really big mistake. Was DePin coined by? Yeah, I think DePin was coined by. It was a fund that was like trying to raise raise like a thesis around us. So like they came up with the name and did all that good stuff. But you have to build your own chain eventually, depending on what you're building, right? So if you're building like a storage chain for us, for it to be scalable and for gas not to get out of control, because right now Jackal probably has like one of the most block, like our blocks are filled with storage transactions, right? If we're sharing block space with other people and we're not able to automate certain parts, things that should have been a transaction on Solana, we can actually automate into the chain directly. Doing stuff like that is pretty special. We have like what, 5 custom modules on our chain, the file trees in the chain, the storage modules, like name service, all that good stuff. I think that is important to build your own chain depending on how involved your DePin network is. If it's just like an economics layer to incentivize people to take photos of stuff or do something like that when you're trying to mobilize, that's just one aspect of it. But depending on how on chain you want to be, depends on whether or not you need to build your own chain, if that makes sense as well.
Why? I guess let's talk about storage chains as a whole. So, like, why hasn't there been? You guys are the only ones that use the Cosmos SDK, right?
We're the only ones on proof of stake.
Yeah, that's also a big difference. Is that like all these like Arweave and Filecoin is an old one.
Saya.
They all are on proof of work. So can you talk about like just why haven't they moved to proof of stake and sort of the downsides of like proof of work for storage chains?
It's a really good question. So the issue with proof of work versus proof of stake is they built with the best technology that they had at the time when they launched, right? They made a decision that the storage providers and the miners are going to be the same machine. When you want to talk about scalability, this is almost like the modular versus monolithic kind of argument just played out all over again, where we think that storage machines are best built for storage, and then our validator machines are both built for doing validation. Making them the same machine is like $10,000 a machine just to kind of like have a node on the network. It's not very scalable. The other issue is that you have these kind of unsealing and sealing processes with these chains into the proof of work blockchain, where it can take up to like 24 hours to get your file back. Also not great. Great if you're doing cold storage, right? Like they have like the cheapest storage ever, but it's not. It's a place to put stuff to rest for a really long time, not as necessarily like a place to build things. Arrowweave kind of similar. It's also like they all kind of coined their own name, but at the basis of everything, they're still proof of work blockchains. We saw an opportunity when we were building. We actually built initially using Filecoin as a cold storage layer, but for the reasons I previously mentioned, it wasn't a great user experience. And we were also building on the secret network for the data permission system. So we kind of ran into scalability ceilings and had to move to our own chain. But what's special is we have a proof of stake chain. We're able to spit out two peer-to-peer networks that are application specific. All those machines are built for a specific use case rather than kind of trying to do everything all at once. And then we also have the benefit of modularity where we can like customize these like different blockchain modules and throw them on the chain as they're needed. And then the last thing that's really important is how we do distribution, right? It comes back down to, do we want to compete with general purpose L1s, or do we just want to make sure every general purpose L1 just becomes a storage chain? And that's just a decision. It's more of a philosophy and distribution decision that we made.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk about the economics and sort of how much users pay, how much a validator cost, and then how much a sort of storage, being a storage provider? Can you talk about the prices for the nodes, how much per year, sort of all those things? Because I didn't know that like it costs that much money to run like a
Filecoin node.
A Filecoin node. That $10,000 sounds like a lot. And especially having to do all the validation and the storage at the same time is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
So just like run through the numbers.
That is kind of ridiculous. Okay, so basically the way that we work is we kind of took a page out of Kajira's book, believe it or not, where we actually decided to go real yield. And when we were looking at everything on the network, they were using inflation as a way to actually subsidize the purchase of storage rather than like subsidizing the bootstrapping of the network. So we chose to go real yield with a small storage stipend, which is kind of like a universal basic income for our storage providers based on the amount of terabytes that they provide to the network. So we just don't get too out of control. You'll notice like with a lot of storage networks, you go and you look at like the actual market caps don't move, but the price is down only, which is kind of like an issue because they're issuing tokens to kind of subsidize the valuation that they have. So when it comes to us, we want real yield. We have a small storage stipend to make sure that everyone doesn't do anything drastic at the same time. But after that is those providers, if you have a file stored on your machine, so say that I buy a terabyte and I only upload two files, like say I only upload one file, that's $15 a month per terabyte. So let's say for 1 month and I have one file, it's being stored on 3 machines that get split evenly across the people that store the files for that storage account. So if people buy more storage than what they use, awesome for the providers, they make more money. But if people use all of it, they're just going to be paid 1/3 of $15 a month per terabyte for what they're storing from that user. When it comes to earnings, it really depends. Like we just finished our V4 upgrade, so we're just going to market really right now. But in total, we have about 824 users, active users with active plans right now is like 191. And then the storage purchase is 135.41 terabytes, and this is only since October 31st.
Yeah, that's good. So
not all users are equal though. Yeah, because if you're building like an AI agent or a chatbot, for example, versus someone that's just throwing a file up to see if the thing works, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I can imagine what a validator looks like because they do like execution. I'm just wondering how a storage provider would look like. Is it just like a whole bunch of hard drives that some guy is running and you don't know who it is and it's like 3 times redundancy? Is that it?
Yeah, the storage providers, like they have to have good internet speed because or else they might miss proving windows. So like there's a certain, like if I was gonna like give like a perfect persona of one of our storage providers, they're like a system administrator at night in their basement, just like going to town. So you kind of need to be a little bit technical to be a provider. And we could have gone the route of like making consumer hardware and handing it out to everyone and then bootstrapping the network that way. But we just don't think that the everyday consumer is like prepared to be a storage provider, or at least like saying that like we should just make like a bunch of validators and give them to everyone, and like that chain will do well, right? It's you have to kind of keep an eye on it and be aware of what's happening if you want to be a good one. The other persona is data centers. So data centers that have idle capacity, they have a bunch of drives that are collecting dust, and if they want to earn on those, they can plug it into the network. If they want it back, they can unplug it, or they can kind of go into shutdown mode where all the files will be taken off the machine by the network. So those are the other kind of users that have just idle capacity, want to earn something instead of nothing on them, and they provide it to the network. So those are kind of like the two types of providers that we have. But who they are, you can see their IP, I guess. So you kind of like know the general location and all that good stuff. We've been thinking about like layering on a Jackal Plus program where we can kind of get like compliance metrics depending on who like the storer is. Let's say they want HIPAA or they want like only this specific region we want to store our data. So we can get a little bit more modular with that. We can build like subnets of storage providers. But yeah, that's kind of where we are on the storage provider front.
So how would it work if, like you said, you want to wind down a node? Do you just sort of, you obviously
There's
don't
a
just like turn
flag.
off the machine?
Well, you can turn off the machine and just unplug it. But the storage providers do put up a collateral. It's just like an X amount of Jackal tokens. You put it up as collateral, and if you don't like put up the flag that like, hey, I'm shutting down this machine, and you just yoink it, then that collateral is going to be taken.
Is that collateral just a base flat amount, or if you're holding more storage, you have to put up more collateral? How does that work
Yes.
exactly?
So it's a base flat amount right now. That was we made that back when Jackal was like trading at 2 cents, and now Jackal is not 2 cents. So we've been actually talking about internally this week about lowering that amount because it's a little bit egregious right now.
Okay. And also talk about geo distribution. So you can have a rough idea of, you can track their IPs, right? But it's not like their home address, just like general
General, yeah.
area. Can you talk
Yeah.
about geo distribution, sort of how many nodes there are, how many average they're storing, and like the sort of distribution? Is it more North America, Europe?
It's pretty much only North America and Europe. Like you have to remember, like we just got started, right? So like I'm sure there's like a lot of heads and nodes in there for sure. But where we are right now is the current like total space available is like we fluctuated when we first launched the network. It was like at a few petabytes, but the economics kind of take care of themselves. Where if there's a bunch of petabytes on the network, but only like 135 terabytes of storage purchased, it doesn't make sense to have like 10x the amount of storage available to the storage needed. So right now, like we're running like a 4x. So there's about 135 terabytes of data storage purchase and 422 terabytes available. So that's kind of where we are right now. The geo distribution of things is we just have machines that are all over the place. So we have a lot down in the United States. There was a map, I think BroChain had it. I'll try to see if I can get you the link of like where all the providers were. I don't know if that tool actually broke in the V4 upgrade, so we just got to make sure that it's up and running again. But there's a list of all the providers. We had like about, I think it was like 150 at its peak. But yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool that you're capable and you can do this now where you're just a small startup and you want to bootstrap petabytes of capacity around the world, assuming that there's demand for it. In our sense is we just didn't want too much on storage available on the network at that time. But it's pretty interesting that you can just bootstrap these entire infrastructure networks instantly. It's like we did no marketing. It's insane. People always say that like it's hard to launch a Cosmos chain. It's like hard to do all these things, and it's hard to like bootstrap the network when like it might be expensive to pay validators, and there's like inflation does have a cost, but not as hard as one may think.
And how is the sort of, I guess, go to market, like the sort of product that I gravitate towards is like the like a Google Drive, like a Dropbox feature. How has been sort of like getting users for that, and just like general go to market?
Yeah, general go to market was pretty good, right? Like relative to like we're in the Cosmos ecosystem, so it's a little bit harder to kind of find users. But like getting all the way up to like 824 users, pretty close to when we launched that actual product is pretty special for us. Um, Outside of that, like there's a bunch of feature upgrades that we're doing right now for that specific like Dropbox type product. When we have to be honest with ourselves, it's still like a case study of what you could build on Jackal rather than kind of like being like a flagship product in that sense. But we're unlocking sharing hopefully next week. So now Jackal goes from single player mode to multiplayer mode, which is pretty special. And then the other thing is the store, like into our chain directly, we built a commission program, which is pretty interesting. I don't know if this has ever been done before, where if on sign up and you go to purchase storage and you insert a wallet address that's someone that recommended you, we also have like our name service, which is like literally only used for the use case of like sending files to other people or getting commission. And you input that is built into our economics that 20% of like the total storage purchase will be kicked back to that user. If people don't put anything, it just goes to the stakers, which is kind of something that's also interesting when you want to talk about like viral growth and having the functionality of like the next steps when building a consumer application. A big one is obviously having sharing and getting viral growth that way, kind of like sent with Hotmail or sent on iPhone kind of thing. But the second piece of that is having a good referral commission program. I think it's awesome that anyone in the world can recommend something and get paid for doing so directly at the protocol level without like a completely decentralized sales force, which is kind of cool. Also works if you're a developer at another company and you say, hey, like I need to pick a storage layer. Here's all our options. Half of them don't work, so these are real options. And then after that, one of them will kick me back 20% of all the storage that's purchased, which either I can use to buy more storage or I can take as a commission, which is kind of cool.
Mhm. For me, I like it the most because like it's decentralized, it's verifiable, but it's also cheaper than Google Drive, which is like it's like only wins.
Yeah, it's but then when you look at Dropbox or like iCloud, it's technically more expensive. But when you look at who we need to go after, and our really big focus is kind of the apps or the people that are screaming for this functionality. We have guys like Angelo at Bitsong that's like actually actively helping us build this because he needs storage, right? At the protocol layer or even just with Jackal JS. So it's pretty cool having the ability to kind of like focus more on like the AWS or like Google Cloud or G Suite, but like not like the G Suite side of things. Do you know what I mean? Like the differences between like one's kind of for app builders and the others, kind of like for consumers, like a G Suite or a Dropbox. But I might have misspoke there. I think that you said Google Cloud and I was thinking G Suite.
I
Anyway,
say Google Drive.
oh, Google Drive. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
A little bit different of a user, and it's a little bit different of unit economics as well because they're going to make an assumption that someone's not going to actually use 2 terabytes of storage.
And so talk more about, I guess, how Jackal started, just like
Oh my
how long
goodness.
has the project existed, founder story, all that.
Oh my goodness. So Jackal started. So me and Marston, we were working at a digital forensics shop in Ottawa, and we got into crypto from investigating flash loan attacks, which is kind of interesting. It was like the index finance attack. We would get hired by law firms to do recovery civilly because when you went criminal, the cops and the crown prosecutors would be like, I don't know what this is. Like, we're sorry, but there's like nothing we can do about it. So that was our intro into blockchain. We were trying to build an e-discovery tool for court. Originally, in the cloud, you can't have forensics tools because inherently, like third party has access to the clean forensic environment, and that's a big no-no. So we're like, in theory, could you have a data permission system on blockchain rails so you have full chain of custody and track and trace of digital evidence from the analyst all the way to the court bench? So we built that, and then we realized that the actual infrastructure to actually store files and making this like a SaaS app instead of like a downloadable kind of like desktop application because like it wasn't scalable because you'd have to have hard drives for each case and it would just stack up on your desk and it wasn't really fun. We were in theory we're like, okay, is it possible to have like a decentralized cloud environment where only the end user with their private key has access to the data? Is this possible? Where in theory it could be a clean forensic environment. So we started toying around with that, and then we were looking at Filecoin and Airweave. And we noticed something pretty quickly, that a lot of the protocols out there didn't have like the self custody aspect of like blockchain products, or the ownership, or like with on-chain permissions, or all that stuff. Everything was primarily a marketplace where it just matches like buyers and sellers of storage, rather than kind of having an application that manages permissions and privacy and end-to-end encryption and all that good stuff. So that's kind of how we started. And then we realized that it was actually more exciting to build the infrastructure itself. And Marcin was an extremely talented developer. He's CTO here. He was like one of those cracked students that we brought on at the forensic shop. He has like a mind. He's kind of like Reese. Have you ever met Reese?
Yes, from Juno. Yes.
They both kind of got started in Minecraft, which is cool. It's a little bit before my time, but he had like a Minecraft mod, 6 million downloads, and we were just like, oh, this guy's like pretty talented developer. So it's kind of like Reese, in the sense that Reese started on Minecraft. Next thing you know, he's like head of Juno for some reason.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. But yeah, that's the story of how we got here. It was really just scratching our own itch, and then realizing that there was actually a bigger issue, where like blockchains are kind of more like calculators than they are computers right now. And until we get like the memory up for you to actually do like more complex things on these rails, we think that that's kind of the next step.
Also, does Filecoin and those other storage chains, do they have like privacy, or is it all public?
It's all public by default. Like obviously anyone can have privacy by like managing your own encryption keys locally, but then like you're managing your own encryption keys locally and like kind of fumbling that around. But everything is pretty much public by default, and it's mostly used for public data. You look at like their users and the people that are using those protocols, primarily like we're backing up like Wikipedia or like the Internet Archive, helping out and like putting stuff onto the rails that way. We're kind of more focused on building like hot storage for web scale applications with program. We just want it to be composable, right? And kind of have everything just be a little bit nicer for developers to interact with. But it takes time. Like our Jackal JS suite needs to get better. We're going to be launching the S3 API, which is kind of like for people that are kind of more Web 2, just looking for cheap storage. And then the outposts and getting Jackal JS up to spec in Solidity and in all these different programming languages, because every time we deploy it again, we have to rewrite everything again, which is the classic, but that's welcome to blockchain land.
The thing that like I enjoy about the whole story is that like Jackal is like something like normal people can use, and that's because like normal people wanted something like this, and they weren't like crypto bros who like wanted to like find blockchain applications. They needed an application and they found blockchain. So, like,
it's kind of a little bit backwards that way, but there's pros and cons to kind of building things like this, right? The pros are like it's awesome and it's just infinite white space, where like you have no shortage of ideas at Jackal Labs of like what we would want to build, or even things we want to build on our own rails, but we're kind of like focused like putting out fires to make sure that the actual rails are good for other people. But it's always just been just pulling pulling a thread that kind of got us here. Is it as like exciting like leverage yield farming? Like probably not. But on the flip side, it's something that a lot of people can understand very easily. Like I can't see like my grandmother like going like degen like leverage perps like with her entire retirement, but I could see her wanting like cheaper or more secure cloud storage that is there for her whenever she needs it. She wants to make sure that her memories don't disappear or anything along those lines. It's a product for her. Or you're someone that's getting absolutely crushed by like transfer fees in cloud. You're building like a transfer application and you're getting drilled like $90 a month per terabyte that's transferred within like the transfer family and outbound. It speaks to that person as well, where it doesn't really matter for the transfer. You're just changing permissions and pulling it down from the providers. So things like it's a way that people can express an opinion on crypto or blockchain in a way that they understand. Is probably an interesting way to put it from the conversations that we've had.
Mm-hmm. Yes, a real application with a purpose. Is there anything I missed? Anything you want to talk about?
Not particularly. We're excited about launching our second outpost. We launched on Archway, so all the developers on Archway have access to storage. We're excited to launch on Base next, and then we're gonna probably just go across EVM like wildfire that way and just give access to more users. Outside of that, we're excited about sharings coming out soon. Our name service and commission system, even though it works on the chain right now, the front ends aren't there yet, so those are coming out soon as well. I'm just excited for the future. It's a great time to be here. It's fun. People are building cool stuff. People are building more data heavy applications. Everyone's talking about like DePin and decentralized science and decentralized AI. And if you want any of those three things, you need scalable storage, preferably on chain.
Anyways, thank you so much, Patrick. Any call to action for the viewers?